This as a forum to plug my book, Remembered Drums, A History of the Puget Sound Indian War. That'd be kind of crass. So rather than talk about my book, Remembered Drums, A History of the Puget Sound Indian War, available in an attractive softcover edition, and also in the deluxe hardcover edition. Note the attractive end pages here of antique maps. It's certainly a fine addition to any library. But, rather than do that, I want to talk about the Puget Sound Indian War and about some of the experiences along the way. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the Puget Sound Indian War, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. It began in October 1855. The competitive phase ended about March 1856. It was fought primarily in Pierce, King, and Thurston counties. The leader on the Indian side was a warrior named Leshai. And as near as I've been able to figure, about 26 whites and about 200 Indians died in the war. So it was a very small war, unless you happen to be one of 26 or one of 200, or you happen to be a friend or a member of the family, in which case it was plenty big enough. Now, the experiences I've had along the way have been rather rewarding. So we'll talk about adventures with the brittle newspapers, the musty books, the forgotten manuscripts, and some of the surprises you find along the way doing the kind of research and writing, the way history is researched and written in our part of the world. You find occasionally a surprise, like a headless skeleton. Now, it has been said that if you steal from one source, you are a thief and a plagiarist. And if you steal from 50 sources, you're a scholar. So the first place that scholars generally go when they're researching history is to what they call the primary sources. That's the letters, the diaries, records of all sorts that were set down by the people living through the times they're trying to depict. And those have been scattered many places now. The two largest collections, when you're trying to do something from our early history, is generally the State Historical Society in Tacoma and the State Archives in Olympia. Now, many things have been lost since 1856, but military correspondence always enjoyed a high survival rate. There was an organization in place for its preservation. The documents were recognized as important at the time, and they were kept together with at least modest care ever since. And the correspondence for the Washington Territorial Volunteers is for the most part in the state archives in Olympia. And those documents are old and brittle, and the ink has faded from a black to a rusty brown, and the penmanship would often horrify a third-grade teacher. But such documents they are. You find things like Jared Hurd, an engineer, writing to another engineer, Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens, detailing his views on how protected river crossings, wagon trains, improved roads, and a string of forts and blockhouses could keep an army in the field in winter. And that was a policy that was adopted by Stevens and the territorial government, and it led ultimately to the defeat of Leschi and his warriors. There were other things that I would find. There was a little bundle of letters, all datelined March 10th, 1856, written at Connell's Prairie. That was the last battle of the war. And these letters were written when the smoke, the confusion, the noise of battle was a memory only hours old. And it was the last day in the history of Puget Sound when the Indians of Western Washington could be called an armed and dangerous military power. Now, I found a lot of letters in sort of a crabbed hand that was nearly unreadable, talking about things like the need for supplies, the need for more tents. And I was cursing these fellows roundly for the carelessness of their penmanship. And it only slowly dawned on me, sitting there in a warm room at a comfortable table in a well-lighted place, perfectly safe. These letters were written in the dead of winter by men with cold, aching fingers. Perhaps written under a dripping fir tree, perhaps written by the light of a single flickering smoky candle. They were written by men fearful of sounds in the night. And with that realization, some of the gulf of years begin to fall away, and you begin to get some understanding that these were written by people very much like ourselves, with very much of the same human frailties that we all have. I was lucky. I was doing this in the 1970s and 80s. I was probably the last generation that was going to be allowed to handle these manuscripts. Most of them now will be digitized or available on microfilm or not available at all. But it was something to know that one day I was holding a letter, looking at a scratchy X, and knowing that no matter how many hands had touched that letter since 1856, it was touched that first day by Pat Canham, who was a leader of the Snoqualmies. And it was a letter in flowery, translated English that he had dictated to some white writer. And in it, he was offering to come into the war on the side of the whites, to settle an old score between the Snoqualmies and the Nisquallies. And it was an offer that was accepted. And he marched about 80 strong with his warriors. They fought a mean little fight with Leschi and some of his warriors on the Green River. Drove Leschi out of his camp, inflicted the first defeat that Leschi had suffered, as a matter of fact. And a while later, Pat Canham showed up in Olympia with a bag of severed heads to claim his reward. Now, anyone who researches the history of an Indian war across about 300 years of American history, they work with one very constant vexation, and that is that most of the time only half the story is there. It was the whites who could put pen to paper and tell their side of the story. With very rare exceptions, the Indians could not. So we know as much of their side of things as their enemies let us know. But just every now and then, there would be a little accident of history that opened up a window into the past. Something like an event in January 1856. Leschi and 30 of his warriors landed on the shore of Fox Island. There was a makeshift Indian reservation that had been set up there to try to intern as many Indians as possible and keep them out of the war. There were about 800 of them there on Fox Island when he landed. Now, Leshai said that he had come to use the Indian agent, whose name was John Swan, to try to negotiate a peace. And it was also said that he had come to try to recruit some of these Indians into the war effort if he failed to make peace. Well, he failed on both counts. The Indian agent did visit his camp, but no peace resulted from it. But while he was there, and he was nearly captured, one of the Indians who was with him used that opportunity to blend into the crowd and drop out of the war. Now, his name was Molohi. And when Leshai was gone, the whites who landed on the island found him. And he was questioned at length. By whom, by what means, for how long, we don't know. But the manuscript of the interrogation survives. And it answers a few questions. The first real battle of the war was a day-long exchange of gunfire across the Green River. Whites on one side, Indians on the other. They blazed away at each other for the better part of the day. And the white officers sent back dispatches reporting that they had been up against several hundred, perhaps 1,000 Indians. They were pretty sure they'd killed at least 40. And long years later, someone found an old Indian who said he was there. And the story that he had to say was that, well, no Indians were killed that day. If the whites thought they shot someone, it was because they held up hats and coats on sticks and didn't fire that way. And he said that first battle was great fun. Well, there you have it. You got 40 killed on one side. You got nobody killed on the other. And we'd be left scratching our heads. But then what Molohi said, only 2 months after this event, he said there was 80 men in the fight. They had not all guns, HB muskets and rifles and 8 revolvers. They came there to fight, their squaws to watch the provisions. Does not know how many Bostons, that's what they called the Americans, were killed that day. They could not see whether any was shot. They had to keep dodging. The Indians had 2 killed dead. 2 died that night of their wounds. And 7 that were shot and are not dead yet think some of them may die. They buried the dead in the woods a short distance from the beach above the road. So, maybe not 40 killed, but maybe not great fun either. Now, I don't know if we might have with us tonight someone who's been an amateur astronomer. If you've ever done that, you know what it is to peer down the barrel of a telescope, waiting through those long moments for the atmosphere to fluctuate just the right way, and suddenly the face of Mars or the rings of Saturn snap into sharp focus, and you see it all clearly for that moment. Now that's what it is, the poor drones that try to sift the scattered refuse of history to come away with a trove like the interrogation of Molohi. Or something else I found one day in an archive box at the State Historical Society. Now, Ezra Meeker, here was a man who in his own lifetime became a great bearded legend. And he knew it, and he loved every minute of it. And it seemed that he never parted with a piece of paper that passed through his hands. The archive boxes there are full of them. There are 15 archive boxes, I believe, with Meeker papers. And one day, in one of those boxes, I found something on this little half sheets of paper, typed out on whatever archaic typing machine that might have passed into Meeker's hands about 1904 or 5. A little manuscript that he'd entitled The Widow's Story. He'd written across it in pencil, The Widow's Story. And as I read, I began to realize that what I was holding here, what had been overlooked for whatever reason until this point, was an interview that Meeker had done with Mary Leshai, the widow of Leshai, back about 1904 or 5. Now, Mary Leshai was not the most curious of women, perhaps not the brightest. She knew nothing of the coming of war until she heard the guns go off. She had very little to say about Leshai as a